today. We've got a load of newsletters on your seats. Please take them home and read them. In it, we also have a bit of a letter about some of the stuff that's going on. I want to particularly draw your attention to the fact that we're organising a sponsored event on the 25th of April called 2 Million Steps for Two-Step. And we had an unexpected loss of a grant, even though we blew out our objectives that they set us. And so we're trying to fill a bit of a funding gap this year. If you'd like to take part, it is in London, but you're more than welcome to organise one here as well on the same day if you want to. Please just get in touch if you want to get involved with that. What I'm going to share today, you'll be pleased to know I have just one point to this message, and it's all about mercy. And the Greek in the New Testament for mercy is a word called elios, which is translated as either mercy, pity, or compassion. And in the parallel Hebrew word in the Old Testament is also often used for the word covenant love, which is, I think, is a very interesting phrase. And so when we read in the New Testament, you know, references to God is merciful and pity and all these sort of words, they're expressions of this covenant love, this love that is, in a way, an agape type of love, a decision type of love. And so before I proceed with that, though, I would like to commend this church very highly for all the stuff that you do. I'm really inspired by your commitment to the work that Hope Worldwide does in Africa, and not only do you raise money, but people here go there, get involved, and there are many of you in this congregation who've long-standing relationships with Hope Worldwide and doing things with Hope Worldwide, whether it be in Afghanistan, in India, on the board, in so many different ways. I'm not going to mention any names because I will miss people off. But you know, this congregation really is upward calling to many congregations and a real inspiration, and really inspires us at Hope Worldwide and encourages us as well. So thank you so much for that. I also want to commend all the rugby fans here for watching the possible, decider for the Six Nations this afternoon between England and Ireland. And I was potentially going to try and check the score and let everyone know, because that would be a compassionate thing to do, but I haven't quite got my head together, so maybe that's for the best. So, although I am here representing Hope Worldwide, and I'm here to talk about mercy, mercy is something that is much bigger than helping the poor. Mercy is an attitude that we have as Christians that has an impact on our family life, on our work environment, on the culture within the church, and on every relationship we have. And so although, yes, I'm here as a representative of Hope Worldwide, I'm not going to be talking a great deal about Hope Worldwide, but I am going to be talking a lot about mercy. If we could go to Ephesians 2, in verse 1, it reads, "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world, and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh, and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of this, because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ." And this mercy, this word mercy here, is this elios word in the Greek. And it's because of God's mercy towards us that although we were deserving wrath, we're made alive in Christ. Amen. And I think it's worth connecting this with Albert's Great Communion today, as this is clearly a scripture that has some sort of reference to justice and judgment and those sorts of things. And sometimes when we read mercy, or we use the word mercy, we think of mercy in the terms of giving mercy to someone who has wronged us. And in this case, God is showing mercy to us because we were deserving wrath, but he chose not to punish us. But a lot of the examples of mercy are actually not to do with that. And if we only read mercy in the context of we were let off, basically, of being punished, we would get the wrong sense of the truer word. And if we try and add all this covenant love, mercy, pity, empathy, compassion into when we read mercy, we'll get a fuller understanding of what the word really means. And one of the examples where it clearly isn't anything to do with judgment is the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10, in verse 25. And it says, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'What is written in the law?' he replied. 'How do you read it?' He answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself.' 'You have answered correctly,' Jesus replied. 'Do this and you will live.' But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, 'Who is my neighbour?' In reply, Jesus said, 'A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these three do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." And so here we have an example of the man showing the mercy has not been wronged by the man receiving the mercy. He took pity on the man and is recognised to have shown mercy by the teacher of the law. And I think it's quite striking that this man, if we were to use the sort of Hebrew use of the word, showed covenant love for his fellow traveller, while the religious people, the people who prayed, who went to many meetings, who sang songs, who read their scriptures, didn't. And I think that's a real warning to us, because we have the potential to be more like the Pharisee or the teacher of the law or the priest or those sorts of people, because we can actually in a way lose ourselves in our faith in a way if we're not careful. And the priest and the teacher of the law had in a way lost some of their humanity in their religion. They had lost the capacity to feel pity for this man. And sometimes, you know, maybe if we look at extremes of that, maybe think of Jihadi John. And he was once a schoolboy in a school in London, and is now a man chopping people's heads off with a knife. And he feels he's doing that for God. And sometimes we can we can take scriptures and we can take advice from each other and we can do things and end up actually being quite lacking in compassion, quite lacking in mercy, and quote lots of scriptures to justify it. And it's actually a really dangerous place to be. And I want us to think about what stops us having mercy. There are many things that can get in the way of us showing mercy. One could be that we are very busy people. And we are so busy we don't even notice needs around us. Maybe we never actually see anyone in need or don't notice it. Maybe it's because we drive everywhere and you know, we never walk anywhere, we might never take public transport, we may never come in contact with people who are obviously in need. We might not live anywhere near people who are in obvious need. In Matthew 14:14, you don't need to turn there, I'm just going to very briefly refer to it, but it says, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed those who were ill. But for Jesus to do that, he was in the large crowd, and he was where the needs were. And maybe our life's pattern means we are never anywhere near need, on a regular basis. Sometimes, because of that, we get into this out of sight, out of mind situation. And we don't realise there is need around us. And one of my jobs at Hope is working with Hope Worldwide in Europe. And when we try and set up new programs in Europe, one of the biggest challenges often is dealing with the church who don't believe there's any need in their city because it's a first world city.
Right.
And that is often the biggest obstacle to the church going and doing anything. And the sorts of things that often needs are hidden from us. In London, homeless people who sleep on the streets are often woken in the middle of the night, and where they're sleeping is sprayed so they can't lie down again. And they're moved around. And often you don't see them. And yet, rough sleeping last year grew in London by 37% and grew nationally by 14%. So it's there, but we don't always see it. There's also now this concept of hidden homelessness. Some people will live in those big metal recycling bins at the back of restaurants, or some people are living in garages and garden sheds. They might sleep on night buses. They might be living in hostels, or they might be what's called sofa surfing, and there's actually many hundreds of thousands of people in those situations, but they're not counted on any official statistics. And we may find ourselves just thinking we actually don't know anybody who's in need, and yet we probably know many people who are overextended in debt, trying to maintain a lifestyle that looks good to everybody else and is living up to standards that they expect or their spouse expects or for whatever reason. And actually they're in significant need, but we just don't notice. One of the obstacles can actually be one of these religious arguments of, well, don't we have to help each other first? Don't we have to help the disciples first? And yes, the scriptures talk about helping especially the disciples, or especially the believers. But that doesn't mean not helping everyone else. That's not the same thing. And we can become religious about that and justify not helping others. In Matthew 15:32, it says, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. And what I find amazing about this passage is they've all been together for 3 days. They are all equally hungry, including the disciples. But Jesus' expectation was that the disciples would serve everyone else. And there's also, I think, sometimes a misconception about how much the government actually does for the poor. And, you know, I think if we've never had to rely on the welfare state, we can have quite a rosy idea of what that really means. And actually, in reality, in regards to homelessness, if a homeless person presents themselves at their local authority, they will be assessed on the priority of need they have. And I don't argue with local authorities needing to prioritise how they use their money, but it means that a lot of people don't fulfil the threshold of having priority need. Generally that means single people, but it's now meaning elderly widows and widowers. We are housing at two-step people in their 60s and 70s who are being made homeless, and their local authority felt they weren't high enough priority. So, you know, but single people, when they go to their local authority, they will often not even meet the housing people in the local authority. They will be turned away because they don't fulfill that threshold. And they end up with nowhere to go. And that's one of the reasons why we do the two-step program. But we can have a wrong idea about how much is actually done for these people. In fact, we do get some grants from different government agencies, and last March, one of our funders was funding us to house people that local authorities sent to us from their Housing Options Department. And don't worry about the slides, that's fine, thanks. And But we knew that local authority were gatekeeping, so the people weren't actually getting to the housing options department. And we housed 20 people in March from that one local authority who had been sent directly to us by what they call customer services at the local authority without sending them to their housing options. When we explained that to our funder, they wanted to fine us for housing the wrong homeless people. And yet it was the local authority that weren't sending them the right people to refer us in the first place. It was one of those, and we housed them to demonstrate it wasn't working. And they were serious. They wanted to take money off us as a charity because we housed the wrong people. So this is the sort of environment that's going on. And and in an environment of funding cuts, people make decisions that don't always seem to you and I rational, but are political and are based on each individual organisation or department's budget, and that takes precedence over people. Now, coming here today, it's very clear that this church is, I would say, a high-performing group of people. And sometimes when people have high expectations for themselves, they also have high expectations for everyone else around them, and quite rightly too. But that can sometimes become self-righteousness. And it can lead into people just need to help themselves. People are responsible for themselves, they just need to get a job, they need to just help themselves. And that is a risk and a temptation for people in a country like Britain, where many of us do take advantage and are able to make the most of opportunities we have. And that's something we have to be very careful of. And that can stop us actually having compassion. That sense of judgment can stop us feeling. And I wonder whether that was actually what the priest and the teacher of the law why they wouldn't notice this man, whether there was an element of judgment in their attitude. And I think there's a subtle thing, and one thing I want to really explore today in compassion is that sometimes we know in our heads, rationally, that compassion is a good idea. And we know that, and we may even decide that it would be great if I could do something about helping people, but then nothing ever changes in our lives. And sometimes what we think rationally doesn't turn into action later, for whatever reason. To try and think about this on the simplest sort of level, I'm sure most of us have experienced walking to an escalator that is standing still, and we rationally recognise it isn't moving, so we should be able to walk down it as if it's a normal stairway, yet we still stumble over those first steps. And something still isn't right. We rationally recognised it's still, but our legs didn't. And something subconsciously in our brain didn't connect with our rational thought, and our actions didn't connect. And so there's been a lot of studies around things like empathy and those sorts of things by psychologists and neuroscientists, and what they've discovered is that we have this thing called a mirror neuron in our brain, which allows us to empathise. It's something God's given us. But it's something that we have to use to get the benefit from, and something we have to practice. And it's not something we always do practice, and I don't want to, become gender specific, but I think sometimes men don't practice it as much as maybe women do. But it's something that we may end up becoming adults and thinking, I can't empathise very well, but we all can. We can all grow in this area. And last year I did a course with an evangelist from Norway who's been trained in this, in empathic communication, and he trained me to become a trainer in empathic communication. And I had an interaction with my son afterwards where I got to practice this, only after my wife reminded me to practice it. But the interaction, and I'm going to end with this interaction as an example of mercy and the potential of mercy, and how often it's easy not to show it. We were getting ready for church. We were running late, as usual, so we were in a hurry. We were trying to get breakfast finished, and in the hustle and the bustle of trying to get ready, and maybe we're being insensitive, I don't know, my son blurted out, across the table, I don't want to go to heaven. So, he's 5 years old at that time, she's now 6. I was tempted to say, shut up, what are you talking about? Or something along those lines. Or, are you saying you want to go to hell then? You know, or, I was really tempted. I immediately, in my heart, thought, he's being difficult. He's saying this because he knows it's going to wind us up. He's being somehow, you know, argumentative with us and wanting to deal with it from that point of view. And I was ready to launch into some way of closing him down quickly in a, you know, impatient way. And my wife said, you know, remember your empathic communication training. So I held back, and so I asked him some questions. Why do you want to go to heaven? And it turned out that he didn't want to go to heaven because none of his friends at school believe in God, and therefore they're not going to go to heaven. He doesn't want to go to heaven because he won't know anyone there, and he doesn't want to be lonely. So that's quite different. But, I was glad I hadn't closed him down. I mean, that was actually very inspiring, you know, and I was quite moved by that. And the conversation was able to move on to, why don't you bring your friends to heaven as well then? And he thought that was a good idea. And so for the following 2 weeks, Trish and one of our neighbours take turns to drive Marcus and the other boy to school, and they're best friends. And every day that Trish was driving, she could hear in the back Marcus trying to convince his friend that he needs to go to heaven. And there was an element of, you know, making things up as he went along in that, because he doesn't really know much about heaven. He knew that there's a lot of golden roads and stuff like that. His friend wanted to know where it was, so it was in the sky. So his friend wanted to know what happens if you fall out of heaven. The angels will catch you. You know, he had an answer for everything. You know, but it was like, this was, you know, and when I heard about this, I thought, oh, I'm so glad I didn't close him down, because, you know, what I would have perceived wrongly as a defiant statement while we were stressed, getting ready for church, was actually a cry for help, a conflict in himself, and an opportunity for him to have a victory. And I came away thinking, how many times have I blocked an opportunity when I was impatient, when I judged, when I didn't show mercy, when I wasn't compassionate, and when I was quick to respond to something. And there's someone I used to go called Soren Kierkegaard said, if one is truly to succeed in leading a person to a specific place, one must first and foremost take care to find him where he is and begin there. This is the secret in the entire art of helping. And I know as a disciple, I've often got into interactions assuming I knew, assuming I already had an answer, assuming I already had the advice I wanted to give someone. The amount of times that I've done that with my wife, always, you know, got all the solutions to anything that's coming up and not listened to the whole story, or, you know, the amount of times I've done that with my parents, you know, in every sphere of life. How many times have I, through lack of mercy, through lack of empathy, denied a victory, blocked a victory taking place? Yeah. And you know, this conversation has been a gift that kept on giving, because in November my grandmother died, and when I heard the news, I was walking into town with Marcus and Arabella, and you know, I thought, do I tell them now, do I tell them later? So I just told them there and then. Arabella's first response was to check how I was feeling and hold my hands. Marcus's first response was, did you go to heaven? You know, how do I answer this? And then we went to the funeral. We were getting a taxi from the funeral in Germany. We were getting a taxi back to the airport, and it was getting dark. And half the sky was dark, half was light. So Marcus had the whole journey, which was about an hour's journey. Him and Arabella were talking about heaven. And the light part of the sky was where heaven was, the dark bit was where it wasn't. You know, the taxi driver, who could seem to understand English, was laughing at their understanding of what angels were and the discussions about angels. And even now, even today, we got into a conversation with someone this morning, and Marcus started talking to this complete stranger about how he's trying to help his friend go to heaven. And this is from a conversation that was now 3 or 4 months away. So it's really left an impact. I mean, it's really convicted me at the power of mercy. And so I just want to leave it there really with everybody and think, this is something we can grow in. Empathy is something we can grow in. It's something that we can develop. It's something we can become better at. We are biologically created to do it. So some scientists believe the discovery of mirror neurons is as powerful and important as the discovery of DNA. But it's something that God gave us. It's there. It's also, I want us to think about in our own lives what potential can be unlocked by ourselves growing in this. And however old or young we are, is something we can continue to grow in. And so I'd really want to urge us all to try and have the same sort of mercy that God has had for us. Thank you.